Wait, you're putting that inside me? The Apache woman froze as the cowboy tried to rescue her life. The sun was slowly lowering behind the wide red cliffs of the Arizona Canyon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. The air was warm, but the evening breeze carried a dry sharpness that hinted night would soon arrive. Ayanna walked carefully along the narrow rocky path, a woven basket hanging lightly from her arm. She had taken this path many times before, but the land was not just land to her. It was memory. It was history. It was home. She moved with confidence, her eyes scanning the ground for the small green plants she had come to collect. Her grandmother had taught her which herbs helped with fever, which soothed pain, and which cleaned wounds. These lessons were passed down quietly, generation after generation. To Ayanna, gathering herbs was not a task. It was a way of staying connected to her roots. The canyon was peaceful at that hour. The distant cry of a hawk echoed across the cliffs. Small lizards darted between rocks. Everything felt calm, familiar, safe. She stepped over a flat stone and reached toward a cluster of plants growing near the edge of a slope. The soil there was loose, but she had stood in similar spots before. She carefully bent down, using one hand to steady herself against a nearby rock. That was when the ground shifted. At first it was only a slight slide under her sandal. She tried to regain her balance, but the gravel beneath her foot rolled like tiny marbles. Her other foot slipped as well. For one quick second she thought she could recover. Her fingers stretched out, trying to grab the edge of the rock, but her hand found only dust. Her body tilted backward. Then she fell. The world seemed to spin. Rocks scraped against her arms and legs. Her basket flew from her hand, herbs scattering into the air. She tried to shield her head, but her shoulder struck a hard surface first. The impact forced the air out of her lungs. Before she could catch a breath, she rolled again, hitting another sharp edge of stone. The canyon walls blurred around her. Finally, her body stopped against a larger rock at the bottom of the slope. For a moment, everything was silent. Ayanna lay still, staring up at the darkening sky. She tried to breathe, but the air would not come easily. It felt as if something heavy was pressing down on her chest. She blinked slowly, confused. The fall had happened so fast. She attempted to sit up. A sudden sharp pain spread across her side, forcing her back down. A soft gasp escaped her lips. Her arm throbbed. Her head felt dizzy. When she touched her forehead, her fingers came away dusty and slightly wet. The evening light was fading quickly now. The canyon, once golden and warm, began turning purple and gray. Shadows stretched longer between the rocks. She needed to move, to walk, to get home before it grew completely dark. Her family would expect her back soon. They would worry if she did not return. Slowly, she pushed against the ground with her hand. Her arm trembled under her weight. Pain shot through her ribs. She managed to lift herself only a few inches before her strength gave out. Her breathing grew uneven. Each breath felt shallow, as if she could not fill her lungs properly. A wave of fear crept into her chest. This was not a small injury. Something inside her body did not feel right. The canyon grew quieter as night approached. The wind picked up slightly, brushing sand against the rocks. Ayanna turned her head, trying to find her basket, but it lay several feet away, upside down. The herbs she had carefully gathered were now scattered across the dirt. She tried to call out. Her voice came out weak, barely louder than the wind. Help. The word disappeared into the vast canyon space. Minutes passed. Or maybe longer. Time felt strange. Her thoughts drifted in and out. She focused on the sky above her. The first star appeared, faint but steady. She thought of her grandmother's voice telling stories beside the fire. She thought of her younger brother laughing as he chased goats near their home. She thought of how simple the afternoon had been before everything changed. Her breathing became harder. Every inhale felt tight. She tried to take a deep breath, but pain stopped her halfway. Her heart beat quickly, as if trying to make up for the air she could not take in. The temperature began to drop. The warmth of the day faded, replaced by the cool desert night. Ayanna shivered slightly. She wanted to curl onto her side, but even small movements sent sharp discomfort through her body. Above her, the sky darkened fully. Stars multiplied across the wide open space. Not far away, along a separate trail that wound through the canyon, a cowboy named Thomas Reed guided his horse slowly between the rocks. He had been searching for a missing calf that wandered off earlier in the day. It was not unusual for animals to stray into the canyon, especially when fresh grass grew after rare rain. Thomas was used to long evenings like this. The quiet did not bother him. In fact, he appreciated it. The canyon had its own kind of beauty at night. The air smelled of dust and dry earth. His horse moved carefully, trained to handle uneven ground. He adjusted his hat slightly as he scanned the path ahead. The fading light made it harder to see clearly. Suddenly, his horse slowed. Then it stopped completely. Thomas frowned. The animal rarely stopped without reason. He gently nudged it forward, but the horse only lifted its head and released a soft, uneasy breath. "What is it, boy?" Thomas murmured. He looked around, listening closely. At first, he heard only the wind brushing against stone. Then, faintly, he thought he heard something else. A small sound, almost like someone struggling to breathe. He dismounted quickly. Holding the reins loosely, he stepped toward the edge of a slope where his horse had stopped. He crouched slightly and peered down into the darker section of the canyon floor. At first, he saw only shadows. Then, his eyes adjusted. There, among the rocks, lay a figure. Thomas's heart jumped. He carefully made his way down the slope, boots sliding slightly on loose gravel. As he got closer, he saw it was a young woman. She was lying on her back, barely moving. "Aye," he called out, his voice firm but not harsh. "Can you hear me?" He knelt beside her quickly. In the dim starlight, he could see dust covering her clothes and small cuts along her arms. Her breathing sounded uneven. Relief mixed with urgency rushed through him. She was alive, but not well. He gently touched her shoulder. "Stay with me," he said calmly. "You're not alone." Her eyelids fluttered slightly. She tried to focus on his face, but her vision blurred. The world felt distant to her, like she was watching it from far away. Thomas noticed how shallow her breaths were. His experience working in remote ranch areas had taught him basic emergency response. He knew falls like this could be dangerous, very dangerous. He glanced up at the sky. Night had fully arrived. The nearest town was far. Riding back for help would take hours. He looked back at her. If he left her there alone, she might not survive the wait. The canyon, once peaceful, now felt heavy with urgency. Thomas took a slow breath, steadying himself. He removed his jacket and gently placed it beneath her head for support. He spoke again, keeping his voice calm and steady. "My name is Thomas. I'm going to help you." Ayanna barely heard the words, but she sensed the presence beside her. The fear she had felt earlier was still there, but it was now mixed with something else, a small spark of hope. Above them, the stars shone brighter in the vast desert sky. The night air grew colder as Thomas knelt beside Ayanna on the rocky canyon floor. The stars above were bright and endless, but down below, everything felt urgent and fragile. He could hear her breathing clearly now. It was uneven and shallow, like each breath was a struggle. He had seen injuries before, but something about the tight rise and fall of her chest worried him deeply. "Ayanna, can you hear me?" he asked gently, leaning closer so she would not have to strain to listen. Her eyelids moved slightly. She was conscious, but barely. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, yet no clear words came out. He could see fear in her eyes, mixed with confusion. Thomas forced himself to stay calm. Panic would not help her. He needed to think clearly. He quickly checked her pulse by placing 2 fingers lightly on her wrist. It was there, but weak and fast. Her body was trying hard to keep going. He carefully examined her arms and shoulders for visible injuries. There were scrapes and bruises, but nothing that explained why her breathing sounded so wrong. He placed his hand gently near her ribs without pressing too hard. When she tried to inhale deeply, her face tightened with pain. That was when a serious thought entered his mind. During his years working on ranches far from hospitals, Thomas had taken part in emergency training sessions. Ranchers often faced accidents, falls, animal injuries, sudden storms. He had learned basic first aid and how to respond in remote areas when help was far away. He remembered one lesson clearly. Sometimes, after a hard fall, air could get trapped inside the chest, making it difficult for a person to breathe. It was rare, but when it happened, there was little time to wait. He listened again to her breathing. It sounded tight, restricted. He looked around the canyon. There was no one else. No nearby road. No signal on his regular phone. Only rocks, wind, and darkness. He opened the small emergency kit he carried in his saddlebag. It was not large, but he always kept it stocked. Inside were bandages, antiseptic wipes, gloves, a small flashlight, and a few emergency tools he hoped he would never have to use. He switched on the flashlight and aimed it carefully at her chest, trying not to shine it in her eyes. He watched closely as she struggled to take in air. Her breathing seemed to grow more strained with every passing minute. Thomas felt the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. If he rode back to town for help, it would take at least 2 hours to return with anyone. She might not have that long. But if he tried something here and made a mistake, he could make things worse. He swallowed hard. "Ayanna," he said softly, "I need you to listen to me." Her eyes slowly focused on him again. She looked small against the wide canyon floor, vulnerable under the endless sky. "I think the fall caused pressure inside your chest," he explained in simple, steady words. "That pressure is making it hard for you to breathe." "There is a way to release that pressure," he continued. "But I have to act quickly." She was scared. Anyone would be. Thomas took off his hat and set it beside him. He wanted her to see his face clearly. He did not want to appear like a stranger towering over her. He wanted her to see calmness. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, "but this might feel uncomfortable for a moment. It's the only way to help you breathe easier." He reached into his kit and pulled out a sealed medical needle designed for emergency situations. His hands were steady, but inside, his heart was pounding. He had practiced this procedure during training, but never on someone lying in the middle of a canyon under starlight. He put on gloves quickly and cleaned a small area on the side of her chest with an antiseptic wipe. The cold touch made her flinch slightly. Her voice came out faint but clear enough this time. "Wait, you're putting that inside me?" Her eyes widened with fear when she saw the small instrument in his hand. In her weakened state, the sight must have looked terrifying. She froze completely. Thomas paused for half a second. He understood her reaction. She was injured, confused, and facing a stranger holding a sharp tool. Anyone would be afraid. "Yes," he answered honestly, keeping his tone calm and gentle. "But it will help you breathe again. I promise you I would not do this if there was another way." The wind moved softly through the canyon, carrying the distant sound of night insects. Everything seemed to hold still in that moment. He leaned slightly closer so she could see the seriousness in his eyes. "If I don't release the pressure, your breathing will get worse," he explained. "You have to trust me." Trust. It was a heavy word, especially between two people who had never met before. Ayana's chest rose and fell unevenly again. The effort of breathing was draining what little strength she had left. Her fear battled against the growing tightness in her lungs. Finally, she gave the smallest nod. Thomas worked quickly but carefully. He positioned the needle between her ribs at the correct spot he had learned during training. He reminded himself of every step. "Stay steady. Stay precise." He spoke to her as he worked. "Keep looking at me," he said softly. "Just focus on my voice." When he carefully inserted the needle, he was as gentle as possible. There was a brief moment of discomfort, and Ayana squeezed her eyes shut. Then something changed. A faint hissing sound filled the quiet air. Thomas heard it immediately. That soft sound meant trapped air was escaping. He watched her chest closely. Within seconds, her breathing shifted. It was not perfect, but it was deeper than before. Her next inhale did not look as strained. Ayana's eyes slowly opened again. She drew in another breath, this time fuller, less tight air. Her body relaxed slightly against the ground. Thomas carefully secured the needle in place to allow continued release of pressure. He monitored her closely, counting her breaths silently in his head. 1, 2, 3. Each breath became steadier than the last. Relief washed over him, but he did not allow himself to relax fully. She was still injured, still weak. This was only the first step. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. "Better," she whispered, her voice still fragile but clearer. Thomas allowed himself a small exhale. He had made the right decision. The risk had been necessary, but the night was far from over. He checked her pulse again. Still fast, but stronger than before. He wrapped a light bandage around her side to protect the area and covered her gently with his spare blanket to keep her warm. The desert cold could be dangerous for someone already weak. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said. She looked at him with less fear now. The moment that had terrified her minutes earlier had given her something powerful. Breath. The canyon around them no longer felt silent. It felt like it was watching, holding the story of what had just happened. Thomas stood slowly and glanced up at the slope leading back to his horse. Moving her would be risky, but leaving her here was not an option. He knelt again beside her. "I'm going to lift you carefully," he explained. "It might feel uncomfortable, but I'll support you." She nodded faintly. The trust between them, born in a moment of fear, had begun to grow. Above them, the stars burned bright and steady, as if lighting the path ahead. Thomas moved slowly, thinking through every step before he acted. The canyon floor was uneven, and even a small mistake could cause more pain for Ayana. He slid one arm carefully behind her shoulders and the other beneath her knees. She was lighter than he expected, but lifting her still required effort because he had to keep her body as steady as possible. "I've got you," he said quietly. Ayana let out a soft breath as he lifted her. The movement caused a brief wave of discomfort, but her breathing remained more stable than before. That small improvement gave both of them strength. Step by step, Thomas carried her toward the slope. His boots pressed firmly into the gravel as he climbed upward. The loose stones shifted under his weight, but he kept his balance. His horse stood waiting above, calm but alert, as if it understood the seriousness of the moment. When he reached the top, he gently lowered Ayana onto a flat patch of ground beside the horse. He took a moment to catch his breath and quickly adjusted the saddle to make space. He knew riding back would not be easy. The path was narrow in places, and the darkness made everything harder to see. He removed his bedroll from the back of the saddle and folded it into a thicker cushion. Then he carefully helped Ayana sit upright, supporting her back with one hand. "We're going to ride slowly," he told her. "You'll sit in front of me so I can hold you steady." She nodded faintly. Her strength was limited, but her eyes were clearer now. The fear that had once filled them had softened into quiet determination. With careful movement, Thomas lifted her again and settled her gently onto the horse. He climbed up behind her and wrapped one arm securely around her to keep her balanced. With his other hand, he held the reins. "Easy," he murmured to the horse. The animal began walking at a slow, steady pace. The canyon path stretched ahead, silver under the moonlight. Shadows moved across the rocks as clouds drifted slowly above. Every sound seemed louder in the night. The crunch of hooves on gravel, the whisper of wind against stone. Ayana leaned lightly against Thomas for support. She could feel the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her and the warmth of the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Each breath she took felt deeper than before, though still slightly sore. "You're doing well," Thomas said quietly. "Just stay awake with me." "I will." They moved carefully through the winding trail. At times the path narrowed, forcing Thomas to guide the horse with extra attention. He kept his eyes focused ahead, but also paid close attention to Ayana's breathing. Every few minutes he asked her simple questions to keep her alert. "What's your family's name?" he asked gently. She paused, gathering strength. "Gray Hawk," she answered softly. "That's a strong name," he replied. The conversation was simple, but it kept her mind from drifting too far. The night air grew colder as they rode farther from the canyon floor. Thomas could feel her shiver slightly. He tightened the blanket around her shoulders. "We're about halfway," he said, though in truth it felt longer. Time passed slowly. The ranch lights were still far away, hidden beyond low hills. Thomas knew he needed to reach shelter as soon as possible. Even though her breathing had improved, she was still weak from the fall and from the shock her body had endured. After what felt like an endless stretch of trail, he finally saw a faint glow in the distance. His ranch house stood alone on open land, a small but steady light shining from the porch. Relief spread through him. "We're almost there," he told her. Ayana opened her eyes and saw the light as well. It looked warm and safe against the dark horizon. When they reached the ranch yard, Thomas guided the horse to a stop. He carefully climbed down first, then gently lifted Ayana into his arms once more. His muscles ached from the ride and strain, but he ignored the discomfort. Inside the ranch house, the air felt warmer. A simple fireplace crackled softly in the corner. The room was modest, with wooden floors and sturdy furniture. It was not fancy, but it was clean and safe. Thomas laid Ayana carefully on a wide couch near the fire. He placed an extra pillow beneath her head and adjusted the blanket around her. The warmth of the room seemed to ease some of the tension in her body. "I'm going to call for help," he said. He walked quickly to the small table where his satellite phone rested. Regular signal rarely worked in this remote area, but the satellite connection was reliable for emergencies. He dialed the nearest medical service station and explained the situation clearly and calmly. "There's been a fall in the canyon," he said. "She's breathing better now, but she needs proper care. I've done emergency decompression. She's stable for the moment." The voice on the other end responded with instructions and assured him that a team would arrive as quickly as possible. It would still take time, but they were on their way. Thomas returned to Ayana's side. Her eyes were half open, reflecting the light of the fire. "Help is coming," he told her. She looked at him quietly for a moment. "You stayed," she whispered. He gave a small nod. "Of course." It remained steady, though she was exhausted. He brought her a small sip of water, helping her drink slowly. Outside, the wind brushed gently against the walls of the ranch house. The wide land stretched endlessly beyond the windows. The world felt quiet again, but not empty. Minutes turned into an hour. Thomas stayed seated beside her, watching carefully for any sign of change. He did not allow himself to close his eyes, kept the fire steady and the room warm. At one point, Ayana stirred slightly. "I thought I was going to stay there," she murmured. "You didn't," he said softly. "You fought." She gave a faint smile, then drifted into a light sleep. The sound of an approaching vehicle eventually broke the silence outside. Headlights swept across the ranch yard. Thomas stood quickly and opened the door as paramedics stepped out with equipment in hand. He explained everything he had done, every detail of the fall, the breathing issue, and the ride back. The medical team worked carefully, checking her condition and preparing her for transport. One of them looked at Thomas with respect. "You made the right call," he said. "If you hadn't acted when you did, this could have gone very differently." Thomas simply nodded. He did not feel like a hero. He felt relieved. They carefully lifted Ayana onto a stretcher and carried her toward the ambulance. As they prepared to leave, her eyes opened once more. She looked at Thomas, standing near the doorway of the ranch house. For a brief moment, their eyes met. There was no fear there now, only gratitude. The ambulance doors closed gently, and the vehicle drove off into the night, carrying her toward the hospital. Thomas stood quietly in the yard long after the lights disappeared. The stars above were still shining, just as they had in the canyon. The land looked peaceful again, as if nothing unusual had happened. But he knew this night would stay with him. Inside the quiet ranch house, the fire continued to glow softly, marking the place where life had been held together long enough for help to arrive. And miles away, inside the moving ambulance, Ayana breathed steadily, each breath stronger than the last. The ambulance moved quickly along the quiet highway, its steady hum breaking the silence of the desert night. Inside, soft lights glowed above Ayana as the paramedics monitored her condition. She felt the gentle motion of the vehicle beneath her and heard the low voices of the medical team speaking calmly to one another. Her breathing was more stable now, but her body felt heavy and tired. Every muscle ached from the fall. Still, with each steady breath she took, she knew something important had changed. The tight pressure that once made her panic was no longer there. One of the paramedics leaned closer. "You're doing well," he said kindly. "Just keep breathing slowly." Her thoughts drifted between the canyon, the ranch house, and the face of the cowboy who had refused to leave her behind. When they reached the hospital, bright lights replaced the darkness of the night. Nurses and doctors were already waiting at the entrance. The stretcher rolled smoothly through wide doors and down clean hallways. The smell of medicine and the sound of distant machines filled the air. Ayana felt both safe and overwhelmed at the same time. Doctors carefully examined her injuries. They took images of her chest and ribs to confirm what had happened inside her body. After several tests, one doctor spoke gently to her. "You experienced a collapsed lung from the fall," he explained in simple terms. "The emergency action taken in the field helped release the trapped air. It gave you time to reach us safely." Dill-list. Still processing everything. If that pressure had continued, the doctor added, it could have become life-threatening. The person who helped you acted quickly and correctly. Those words stayed in her mind. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Thomas sat alone at his wooden kitchen table. The house felt unusually quiet without the urgency that had filled it earlier. His boots were still dusty from the canyon. His hands, though steady now, carried the memory of what they had done. He replayed the night in his thoughts. He remembered her frozen expression when she saw the needle. He remembered the small nod she gave him, choosing trust in the middle of fear. He knew how easily things could have turned out differently. The following morning, sunlight poured through the ranch windows. Thomas stepped outside and looked toward the horizon. The land appeared calm, almost as if it were unaware of the dramatic events of the night before. Later that day, he received a phone call from the hospital. The nurse on the line spoke clearly. "She's stable," she said. "She's resting. She'll need time to heal, but she's going to recover." Thomas let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "Thank you," he replied quietly. At the hospital, Ayana's family began to arrive. Her mother entered the room first, her face filled with concern. When she saw her daughter awake and breathing steadily, tears formed in her eyes. She gently held Ayana's hand. "You're safe," her mother whispered. Ayana nodded. "Someone found me." Over the next few days, more family members visited. Word spread quickly through their community about what had happened in the canyon. Some were shocked she had gone alone that evening. Others were simply grateful she had survived. One afternoon, a doctor entered the room again and spoke with Ayana and her family together. "The man who helped her performed a difficult emergency procedure," the doctor explained. "Without it, we would not be having this conversation." There was silence in the room as everyone absorbed the weight of that statement. Ayana's father finally asked, "Who is he?" "A rancher named Thomas Reed," the doctor answered. The name was unfamiliar to them, but the impact of his actions was clear. Days passed, and Ayana's strength slowly returned. She practiced taking deep breaths under the guidance of nurses. At first, each inhale felt tender and uncomfortable, but she refused to give up. She remembered how hard it had been to breathe in the canyon. Compared to that, this discomfort felt manageable. During quiet hours, she thought about the moment she had frozen in fear. "Wait, you're putting that inside me?" she had asked. The memory made her cheeks warm slightly with embarrassment. She understood now that her reaction was natural. She'd been frightened and in pain. But she also remembered the calm in his voice when he answered her. It was not forceful, not impatient. A week later, when she was strong enough to sit up for longer periods, she asked her mother a simple question. "Can he visit?" "If that is what you want." A message was sent to the ranch. When Thomas received the call inviting him to the hospital, he hesitated for a moment. He was not used to stepping into hospital rooms. He preferred open land and wide skies, but he understood the importance of closure. The next afternoon, he walked into the hospital, carrying his hat in his hands. He had washed away the dust from his boots, but he still felt slightly out of place in the bright, polished hallway. When he reached her room, he paused at the door and knocked lightly. "Come in," a soft voice answered. He stepped inside. Ayanna was sitting up in her bed, sunlight falling gently across her face. She looked different than she had in the canyon. Stronger, clearer. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she gave a small smile. "You didn't hesitate," she said quietly. Thomas shook his head. There wasn't time to. Her father stood nearby, observing carefully. There was a natural caution in his eyes, shaped by history and experience. But there was also gratitude. "You saved my daughter's life," her father said calmly. Thomas lowered his gaze slightly. "I just did what needed to be done." The room felt lighter than expected. The tension that could have existed between strangers from different worlds was replaced by mutual respect. Ayanna looked at him thoughtfully. "I was afraid," she admitted. "I know," he replied gently. "You had every reason to be, but you stayed calm," she continued. "Even when I wasn't." Thomas gave a small, almost shy smile. "You were stronger than you think." Their conversation was simple but meaningful. It was not about heroism. It was about a moment of shared humanity when one person needed help and another chose to act. After Thomas left the hospital that day, Ayanna felt something shift inside her. The canyon had always been a place of tradition and gathering. Now it also carried the memory of survival. As weeks passed, she continued to recover. The hospital visits became shorter, and eventually she returned home. Her community welcomed her warmly, and stories of what had happened traveled beyond her family, reaching nearby towns. Some people focused on the dramatic rescue. Others focused on the trust that had formed in such a short time. For Ayanna, it was simpler than that. She had faced fear and chosen to trust. Thomas had faced risk and chosen to act. The canyon still stood tall and silent under the wide sky, but now, whenever Ayanna looked toward its cliffs, she did not only remember the fall, she remembered the breath that returned. She remembered the steady voice that said, "You're not alone."